Got something a little different for you. This is out of Tia's personal collection, and something that we realized we hadn't shown on the channel yet. A Browning BDA in 380 double stack, single action, double action, hammer fired, all metal gun. Tabletop review coming up next on GB. So a while back, a few years back actually, when Tia and I first met and she was looking into different guns, her experience base was relatively limited, mostly to pocket 380s and things like that. And I said, well, you know, guns in 380 don't have to hurt, and guns don't have to hurt. And she hadn't learned anything about how to grip or shoot yet. You know, I taught her a few things, but nowhere near the skill she has now. Just was familiar and generally comfortable with firearms. So I suggested looking into something like this. Why? Well, we've got a double stack, 13+1 round capacity, hammer fired. Why hammer fired? Well, when the slide has to also cock the hammer, whew, take some push. There we go. A lot of recoil is absorbed by that. It helps somewhat lengthen the recoil impulse and make it less snappy. It's also a bit of a, well, it's blowback, but not quite like you're used to fixed barrel blowback. And I, of course, am an advocate of single action, double action. I love the idea of a decocker, and this particular one, not only do we have single action and double action, but the decocker, if left down, serves as a safety. So for someone getting into the idea of carrying guns and just getting more familiar with them, this really has a bit of everything. Now this one was made by FN in Belgium. In fact, if anybody out there knows that proof mark, I'd be happy to hear what you know about it, the PB. I've looked and didn't find any answers for it, but I do know it was made in Belgium by Fabrique Nationale, or the original FN, if you will, and the model is a BDA 380, as is marked on there. These, I believe, were European law enforcement trade-ins. She picked this up for $260. Can you imagine that? An all-metal hammer-fired gun for 260 bucks. Pretty cheap, but kind of a neat piece. And I thought I'd give you a tabletop look at the features and thoughts, design, etc. behind this thing, because we really don't see guns like this much anymore. Brought you in close, and you've already seen the gun is clear, and since we've had a resurgence of people that think I'm a cyborg, no, I do not film this with my eyes. I'm not pointing this gun at my face. I'm pointing it at a camera that is about 2 feet in front of my face. But what we're looking at is a design reminiscent of, I'd say, the 1950s through 1980s. We have a little bit of slendering here, and not for doing press checks, but just to help make holstering a little bit easier. No rail. That wasn't a thing. No texturing on the front of the trigger guard, because that technique probably wasn't popular yet. In fact, we don't even have texturing on the front strap. It is smooth polish, minus the ding that happened at some point in this gun's life, but no texturing. You notice the trigger guard is aesthetically pleasing in this nice loop, but it's also much lower than it needs to be, which forces the hand down. Now the good news for me with this thing is I can still get about 2.5 fingers on it for a good solid grip. Magazine, of course, is double stack, and your typical European witness windows at full, medium, hey, you're getting low, and then of course, you know when you're out. 4 rounds is the low count on this one. It does have a magazine disconnect safety, which is interesting. It's a very European thing. Fortunately, it still has a push button mag release. 0 beveling on the bottom for reloads. My assumption as a duty gun is this was meant to be a deeper concealment thing, sort of like the PPK, and the idea being that it's either a backup gun or you're, I guess, just going to have to practice your reloads. Black plastic grips, which are rather good looking for being plastic, and they have this rest here for the thumb. So for a single hand only firing, it's very comfortable. It does put the thumb low enough that if I want to have hands high on this thing, a modern American way of shooting a gun, not only do I have to push my thumb out of the way with my left hand, but my thumb ends up running right underneath the slide, and that edge of the slide racing back and forth on the thumb. Zero texturing on the back strap. Slide to frame is super tight front and rear, like a good old-fashioned gun. And for sights, we've got a nice tiny blade up front and tiny rear sights. I did notice the beaver tail quite pronounced. Also keeps the hand, even my large hands, plenty clear of the hammer, which is nice. Going around the right side, you can see we have an external extractor here, and the decocker and safety is on both sides. Exposed trigger bar, kind of like on Berettas, or more recently we showed a Lionheart that has that. As far as what the trigger pull is like, those of you who watch the channel know that I really don't care about weight. It's more about feel, unless the weight is just so absurd that it's going to throw a shot. Our single action, back to a wall, pretty clean break. Reset. I have to do this with the mag in because it's got a magazine disconnect. Is a decent length of travel and takes you forward of that wall. The double action is fairly smooth. It's got weight to it, but it's smoothable enough that, see if I can do this without moving the front sight. Just a little tick at the end when it's already fired at that point. So very nice single action and double action, and a responsible, reasonable trigger for duty or defense use. Next, we'll field strip the Browning BDA and take a look inside the gun. Field stripping the BDA is really easy. So we've got to take our mag out and, of course, check for clear. It's got a really stout spring on it, but what we've got is a lever here and a pin on this side. You push that pin, which will stick out, permitting you to rotate the lever down, and the slide comes right off. No need to pull the trigger. Another nice thing for either new shooters or something like law enforcement with very limited firearms training. Big beefy rails, thick ejector, everything overbuilt like the gun was meant to last for decades, as it has. Pulling out our recoil assembly, you notice we have a steel rod. There we go. And an uncaptured spring. That's nice for high round count service guns, or if you're buying a surplus gun like this, because you can find springs to replace this and retune it back. This one's plenty stiff, so I'm assuming it's still good. Getting the barrel out, it has a slide forward to tilt and pop out. And there's a look inside of our slide. Not the cleanest machining, and you can see these shines here. There's some chattering, like under recoil. Maybe this kind of rocks a little bit on the rails. In the barrel, one thing that impressed me with this, if the lighting will catch it, is though we don't have any of the chamfering that we expect on modern barrels for modern hollow points, it's a very short feed ramp. The feed ramp is practically nothing. To see how this all sits, there's a groove in the receiver there. So I'm trying to do this through the camera. The barrel slides back and forth through here. The bulk of your feed ramp is attached to the frame. The barrel does not move or reciprocate in this, so it is a blowback, which would explain the heavy spring, but once again that's softened by having the hammer fire. But it is cool to have a blowback operated gun that isn't a fixed barrel, just for parts interchangeability, for cleaning, servicing, things like that. Reassembly, pretty simple. We get everything back where it needed to be, get the slide on, and rotate that lever back up. Come on. I think I locked this open the first time. I had to figure all this out, because one of the things you get when you buy a surplus gun like this is no manual, usually. Alright, so it's not going into place. Last time this happened to me, the spring wasn't perfectly aligned. Come on. Doesn't want to do it. just figured it out off camera. Now it's back in position. So what I had to do is make sure that the barrel was seated all the way to the rear. The barrel's locked now. I don't know if it'll let me rotate this with the slide back. I'll undo it again. So now we've got our lever down, and what was happening was the barrel's still free at this point where I was getting stuck. The barrel has to be all the way to the rear, and then it snaps into place. You let the slide go. Magazine disconnect works. Double action works. Single action. We've got a reset, and we've got our decock. So interesting piece. I didn't do chamber fitment simply because I don't have match 380. I have never seen any. I've got some good 380, but none that I know is absolute standard. What we will find out though when we get to the range is how this thing does with modern 380 ammo. We'll run our standard battery of tests through it, just like we would any other pistol, and enjoy it along with you. Tia bought this, loves it, thinks it's a very handsome gun. I agree with her, but just by the time she started shooting more, she got more comfortable with 9mm, the offerings of 9mm, and wanted something smaller and lighter simply for concealment, because this is rather thick for a small 380. But still a nice piece of history, a design that I wish we'd see more of. We have reviewed some other 380s that are somewhat reminiscent of this. The closest thing that I can think of off the top of my head is the Fati 380 from SDS Imports. This is an open top, more of a Beretta design, but very similar in concept and in size and general features. Just a slightly different version. It'd be cool if somebody brought this back, and I'm sure there are aftermarket or other make clones, if you will. If you guys know of any, let us know in the comment section, because it's kind of a fun piece. And let's get this out to the range and see how it does. Thanks for watching.